Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video. Wishing you all good health and peace. The dawn crept over the village like a lover's whisper, its light slipping through the mist, brushing the rice fields that swayed beyond the dike. Diep stood by a weathered gate, her fingers tracing a bamboo basket, its strands worn as her past. The air was heavy with dew and wood smoke, laced with the cluck of chickens and the faint rush of a stream winding through the hills. Hockey, her small dog, darted across the path, his bark sharp against the morning, but even his joy couldn't still the flutter in her chest. Yesterday James had held her hand, his eyes bright with a vow. "I love you, Diep," and given her flowers, their petals soft as a promise. Now, as the village woke, she wondered if that love, like the dawn, could hold against the shadows of her fears. She stepped onto the dirt path, her sandals sinking into the earth, each footfall a quiet echo of her life. The village was a tapestry of memory, palm roofs glinting under the sun, a market where voices haggled over greens and guavas, a stream that glittered like scattered coins. She'd come here broken, a girl sold as a child, her name her only shield, until Tuan had found her, his voice trembling with truth. "You're my sister," he'd said, and their mother had wept, her hands mapping the birthmark on Diep's neck, a guide to a family lost for 20 years. They'd sat in a shack, weaving baskets by lamplight, the air thick with rice and forgiveness. "You're home," her mother had said, her cough a soft wound, and Diep had clung to it, a spark against the dark she'd wandered. But home was no armor against doubt. Her mother's illness lingered, a shadow eased but not gone, and Tuan's struggles had left scars, his hands once empty, now lighter with James's help. Diep had gone to the market yesterday, buying greens for 15,000, her coins few but enough to cook a meal. An old woman had paused, her face etched like bamboo, and pressed a guava into her hand. "For luck," she'd said, and Diep had smiled, her throat tight, wanting to believe in such things. She'd returned to the shack, fed Hockey, and cooked with her mother, their laughter a fragile thread against the years she'd been nothing. A girl sold, a wife escaped, a daughter reclaimed. The stream shimmered now, its waters catching the noon sun, a ribbon of light against the earth. Diep knelt beside it, her fingers trailing in the current, its chill grounding her thoughts. She'd met James here, his truck mired in mud, her laughter shy as she helped him push. "I'm no city man," he'd said, his eyes warm, and she'd believed him, her heart opening before she knew his wealth. They'd worked the fields together, planting melons, dreaming of a farm where love grew deeper than roots. "This is ours," he'd told her, his voice steady as the hills, and she'd seen a house, a garden, a life woven from their hands. But hardship had tested them, her mother's cough, Tuan's debts, a father's command, and she'd faltered, her heart torn between love and duty. Yesterday had been a turning point, a morning bright with hope. Diep had woken to the scent of dew, her hands busy in the garden, its green sprouting under her care. James had joined her, his shirt damp with sweat, his laughter light as they planted seeds, giant cat vegetables he'd read, sprouting in days, harvested in months. "We'll build this," he'd said, gesturing to the earth, and she'd nodded, her heart wide as the sky. They'd worked together, trowels digging soft soil, Hockey darting through the rows, and when the sun climbed high they'd sat under a tamarind, sharing water, their silence warm with trust. "You're enough," he'd told her, and she'd wanted to hold it, a light against the years she'd felt small. The market had pulsed that afternoon, its stalls alive with Tet's hum, apples at 15,000 a kilo, greens tied in twine, a woman selling flowers with a song. James had gone alone, buying a bouquet for 500,000, its petals bright as her surprise. He'd driven her to a cafe, his truck new, a Ford Raptor he'd said, its keys heavy from a deal struck across borders. She'd teased him about city ways, but her heart had raced when he stopped, the air sweet with milk tea and coffee. "Diep," he'd said, holding the flowers, his voice low. "I love you." The words had landed like rain on dry earth, and she'd frozen, her hands trembling as she took the bouquet, its scent wrapping her in a warmth she'd never known. He'd spoken of longing, of a world dim without her. "Half my life left with you," he'd said, and she'd wept, not for pain but for joy, her tears bright as the stream's light. "I love you too," she'd whispered, and he'd smiled, his hand finding hers, the cafe fading as they stood together, a vow sealed under the village sky. The woman at the counter had laughed, bringing strawberry tea and coffee, and James had grinned, calling the bitterness sweet. a taste that mirrored their love. Forged in trials but theirs. "Stay with me," he'd said, and she'd nodded, her heart a quiet drumbeat against the dusk song. Now Diep walked to the shack, its roof patched, its kitchen alive with the scent of rice. James was there, his hands stained with soil, his plans spilling like seeds. A farm, a company, a life where farmers like Tuan could thrive. He'd bought the truck for the fields, he'd told her, not the city, and she'd smiled, seeing the boy beneath the CO, the one who'd laughed with her in the mud. Tuan had called, his voice clear, their mother's cough softer, her days brighter with care James had helped provide. "He's a good man," Tuan had said, and Diep had nodded, her gratitude deep as the earth, knowing her brother's hands were free to hold their family close. The village carried on, its rhythm a gentle pulse, roosters crowing, a child's laughter fading into the dusk, the stream's murmur a constant hymn. Diep thought of her mother, her hands weaving baskets, her voice soft with love. "You're home," she'd said, and Diep had believed it, wanted to carry it through the years. But her mother's illness lingered. A shadow medicine might not lift, and Tuan's burdens, though eased, were a thread that could tighten. James's father was gone, his control lifted, but his words echoed. "I was poor once," a reminder of the world that shaped them. James had spoken of work, of meetings and machines, of a company that fed the fields. He'd bought books for her, their pages heavy with ideas, and offered a teacher, a chance to learn beyond the newspapers she'd read alone. "Try," he'd said, his eyes bright, but she'd faltered, her hands rough from soil, her heart heavy with doubt. "I'm not like you," she'd whispered, and he'd shaken his head, his voice firm. "You're more." She'd wanted to believe him, to see a path where her hands, calloused from gardens, could hold a pen, a place in his world. But the thought was a stone, sharp with fear, and she turned away, her silence loud with questions. The garden glowed now, its greens bright under the moon, a sliver of light against the hills. Diep wandered there, hockey at her heels, his warmth a fleeting balm. She let her fingers brush the leaves, their dew cool against her skin, and thought of James, his vow, his hand in hers. He'd rebuilt this place, not with wealth but with faith, and she'd matched it, her heart a flame that burned steady. They'd grow together, she knew, planting more than vegetables, building more than shacks. But the future was a path unwalked, its turns hidden in shadow. Her grandmother's voice rose, faint as the stream's song, sharp as stone. "The heart finds its way," she'd said, and Diep wanted to trust it, to believe that love could endure, that James's oath was enough. She thought of her past, sold and reclaimed, a girl who'd built a life from scraps. A shack, a garden, a love she'd fought for. James had seen her, not as broken but as whole, and she'd dared to dream with him, to plant more than crops, to grow a future. Trials had shaped them. Poverty, doubt, a father's fear. But they'd emerged, hands clasped, hearts alight. But questions lingered, soft as moonlight, heavy as earth. Would her mother heal or fade like the dusk? Would Tuan stand tall or falter under new burdens? Would James, with his fields and dreams, stay hers, or would her fears, her rough hands, her quiet doubts, pull them apart? She thought of the cafe, the flowers, the tea that tasted of joy, and James's voice. "I love you," a vow that held her still. Would it bloom forever, or wither under trials yet to come? She didn't know, and the not knowing was a wound, faint but deep, that pulsed with every breath. Sleep would come later, broken by hockey's whines and the creak of the shack's walls. For now, Diep stood in the garden, the moon high, the village quiet save for the stream's endless hymn. She thought of James, of his promise, of the love they'd forged in fields and dust. The answers weren't here, not yet. They lay beyond the hills in a dawn she couldn't see, and as she turned back to the shack, her steps steady, her soul burned, a flame that trembled but didn't die.